She's embarrassing herself. That's what my son-in-law said, loud enough for the entire table to hear, on the night I gave my daughter the only thing I had left of her father. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I picked up my coat, walked to my car, and drove home through the November snow thinking about one thing: the manila envelope in the back of my closet that nobody knew existed. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how we got there. My name is Margaret, and I am 63 years old. For 31 years, I worked as a registered nurse at a regional hospital in Sudbury, Ontario. Night shifts, double shifts, holidays, the kind of work that leaves you with bad knees and a good heart, and very little in between. I raised my daughter, Claire, mostly alone after her father, Robert, passed from a heart attack when she was 11. We lived in a small house on Elm Street, the kind of house where the furnace makes noises in February and you learn to sleep through it. Claire was bright. She earned a partial scholarship to the University of Toronto, and I covered the rest. I never told her how. I just told her to study hard, which she did. She graduated with a degree in marketing, moved to Toronto permanently, and eventually met a man named Dominic at some corporate event downtown. Dominic came from money. Old money, the Toronto kind, where the family name is attached to a building somewhere and nobody ever talks about how it got there. He wore good shoes and said little and always looked at me the way people look at something in the wrong place, like a garden chair left in the hallway. Claire changed around him. Not overnight, gradually, the way a photograph fades if you leave it in sunlight too long. She stopped calling on Sundays. She started referring to Sudbury as up north with a particular tone. When she came home for Christmas the year before the wedding, she spent most of the visit on her phone and told me my kitchen needed updating. I didn't say anything. I was her mother. I understood that children grow and pull away and sometimes come back different. I told myself it was Dominic's influence and that she would find her way back to herself eventually. The wedding was planned for the last Saturday of October at a private venue outside of Oakville. 300 guests, caterers flown in from Montreal, a string quartet. I wore the blue dress I'd bought at the Bay 6 years ago for a colleague's retirement party, and I felt fine about it until I arrived and saw the other guests, and understood that I was very much not the intended aesthetic. I had spent weeks thinking about what to give them. I couldn't match the gifts I'd seen on the registry. Crystal decanters, a Le Creuset set, weekend stays at resorts. So I decided to give Claire something that mattered more than any of that. I gave her a letter from her father, written the year before he died, that I had kept sealed in a cedar box in my bedroom closet for 22 years. He'd written it for her wedding day, back when we still thought he'd be there to see it. I tucked the letter inside a small card from me, placed it in a simple cream envelope, and wrapped it in brown paper with a sprig of dried lavender from my garden, the way my own mother used to wrap things. It didn't look like much. I knew that. But I thought Claire would understand. She opened it at the gift table between a box from Tiffany and something wrapped in silver foil from Dominic's parents. She looked at the brown paper. She looked at the lavender. She looked at Dominic. Before we continue, have you ever given someone a piece of your heart and watched them hand it back to you without opening it? Dominic made a sound, not quite a laugh, something worse than a laugh. He picked up the envelope, turned it over, and said, "What is this, your old grocery list?" A few people nearby smiled. Claire said nothing. She set the envelope down at the edge of the table, away from the other gifts, like you'd set down something you weren't sure was clean. I stepped forward. I said, "Claire, that's from your father." I said it quietly, just for her. She looked at me with an expression I had never seen on her face before, not in 32 years of knowing her. Patient, embarrassed, the expression of someone managing a situation. "Mum," she said, "maybe this isn't the time." Dominic put his arm around her shoulders and smiled at the people watching. "She's embarrassing herself," he said. "Someone should walk her out." One of his cousins laughed outright. I stood there for 3 seconds. I counted them, because that is what I do when I need to decide something. 1, 2, 3. Then I picked up the envelope from the edge of the table, put it back in my coat pocket, and walked out to the parking lot. I did not say goodbye. I did not cry until I was on the 400 heading north, and then I cried for about 40 minutes, and then I stopped. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea and the manila envelope from the back of my closet. I had never opened it. Robert had been the one who handled our finances, and when he died, his brother Gerald, a quiet, careful man who had worked for 40 years as a trust administrator in North Bay, helped me sort through everything. Most of what Robert left was modest. The house, which was paid off, a small RRSP, a life insurance policy that kept us going through Claire's childhood. But Gerald had also handed me this envelope and said, "Maggie, I don't want you to open this until you need to, and I want you to know you're going to be all right." At the time, I assumed he meant emotionally. I filed the envelope in my closet and forgot about it, the way you can forget about something that sits in the same place for long enough. I forget it was in there for 22 years. I opened it that night at the kitchen table, with the snow coming down outside and my tea going cold beside me. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a note in Gerald's handwriting and 2 documents underneath. The note said, "Robert asked me to hold these in trust until you were ready. The RSP and the policy are just the surface, Maggie. He started quietly in 1987 and never stopped. I've been managing it since. Call me when you open this." The documents were a trust account summary and a portfolio statement. I sat at my kitchen table in Sudbury in my blue dress and read them twice, because the first time I thought I had misread. I had not misread. I called Gerald the next morning. He answered on the second ring, the way Gerald always answers, as if he's been expecting you. "Maggie," he said, "I wondered when you'd call." I asked him to explain it to me from the beginning. He did. Robert had started investing in 1987, 2 years before Claire was born, through a self-directed account with a small brokerage in North Bay. He'd been methodical and patient. The way Robert was methodical and patient about everything. He reinvested dividends. He diversified. He never touched the principal. When he died, he transferred management authority to Gerald through a power of attorney document I had signed years ago and forgotten about, with instructions to continue the strategy and to tell me only when I decided to look. Robert had believed, Gerald said, that I would know when I needed to know. The number was not what I would have imagined in 30 years of not thinking about it. It was significantly more than that. Gerald said the words and I wrote them down and looked at what I had written. I asked Gerald what I should do. He said, "That's entirely up to you, Maggie. It always has been." I drove to Toronto 6 days later. I did not tell Claire I was coming. I had one meeting scheduled, arranged by Gerald, with a private wealth manager at an office on Bay Street. The meeting took 2 hours. The woman I met with was professional and unhurried and spoke to me the way I appreciated being spoken to. We discussed options. We discussed timelines. We discussed what I wanted the money to do. I told her what I wanted. She said she could arrange it. She asked me once if I was certain. I said yes. Before I left Toronto, I also called a number that Gerald had passed along a woman who specialized in real estate and development consulting, primarily in Northern Ontario. Her name was Patricia, and she was brisk and competent and asked good questions. We spoke for an hour. She said she would get back to me within the week. She got back to me in 3 days. Meanwhile, Claire called. Not to apologize, to explain. There was a difference. She called to tell me that the wedding had been emotional for everyone, and that Dominic could sometimes come across as blunt but meant well, and that she hoped I understood. She said it in the careful voice she used now when she spoke to me, the one that kept a certain distance built in. I told her I understood completely. She sounded relieved. I did not tell her about Gerald's call, or the manila envelope, or the meeting on Bay Street. I asked how the honeymoon had been. She said Portugal was beautiful. I said that was lovely. We spoke for 11 minutes and said nothing to each other at all. Patricia called the following Thursday with news about a property in Sudbury. A former mill site on the edge of the city, 42 acres, with solid infrastructure bones and a remediation plan already partially completed by the previous owner. It had been sitting in limbo for 3 years because no one had been willing to commit the capital needed to take it from partially remediated to fully developed. The city had been looking for a partner. I asked Patricia what it would take. She told me. It was a significant number. I told her to proceed. The project took 14 months. I will not pretend I was involved in the technical side of things. Patricia handled that, and she was extraordinary at her job. What I was involved in was the purpose of the project. The city needed affordable housing, Sudbury had a shortage, the kind that hits working families and seniors, and people transitioning out of difficult situations. We built 72 units, not luxury, not symbolic. Practical, well-insulated, properly constructed units that would last, designed with input from a local housing advocacy group that knew better than I did what people actually needed. There was a small ceremony when the first families moved in. I stood in the back. I did not make a speech. A woman about 30 years younger than me moved in with her 2 children and a cat, and she stopped on the way to her door and said thank you to the building in general, not knowing who I was. And I thought about Robert and about the letter still in my coat pocket and felt something settle in my chest that had been unsettled for a long time. Claire found out 4 months later, not from me. From a story in a Sudbury news outlet that Patricia had, against my instructions, allowed to include my name. Patricia apologized. I told her it was fine. In some ways it was easier. Claire called on a Thursday evening. She had clearly been sitting with the information for a day or two before she called, processing it, because her voice when she spoke was not the careful managed voice. It was her real voice. The one I remembered. She asked me if it was true. I said yes. She asked how long. I told her about Gerald and the envelope and the 22 years. I told her about the night of the wedding and the drive home and the cup of tea. I told her all of it calmly, the way you tell the truth when you've been waiting a long time and have nothing left to protect. She was quiet for a while. Then she said, "Dad knew?" I said yes. Her father had spent 15 years building something quietly because he loved us, and he had trusted me to know when to look, and I had waited until the moment I needed to in order to understand what to do with it. She started to cry. Not the managed kind. I recognized the sound of it because it was the sound she made at 11 years old, at the hospital, the day we lost Robert. I let her cry. I didn't rush her. When she was ready, she said, "I'm sorry about the envelope. I'm sorry about what Dominic said. I'm sorry I didn't stand up for you." I told her I appreciated that. She asked if she could come to Sudbury. I said yes. I told her the guest room was made up. I told her to come alone. She came the following weekend, by herself, without Dominic. She sat at my kitchen table in the same spot where I had sat with the tea and the cold night and the manila envelope. I made her father's soup, the one with barley and root vegetables that I make every winter. We talked for a long time, not about the money, about her father, about who she was becoming and who she had decided to be, and whether those were the same person. She is not a bad person, my daughter. She made choices that hurt me, and she will have to live with that in her own way for a while. But she is not her worst moment, and I did not raise her to be reduced to one. Dominic sent a message through Claire asking if we could meet. I have not responded yet. I am taking my time. Gerald came for dinner in December. He is 78 now, walks with a cane, still answers the phone on the second ring. I made the barley soup again and we sat at the table, and he told me stories about Robert that I hadn't heard, small ones, from before we met. I wrote some of them down afterward. I will give them to Claire when the time is right. The envelope with Robert's letter is on my dresser now. Not in the closet, on the dresser where I can see it. I haven't opened it yet. I don't know exactly when I will, but I know it will be the right time when it comes, because that's what Robert understood about me long before I understood it about myself. He built something quietly and trusted me to know when to look. I looked. I want to say something to anyone who has been dismissed for the life they chose, for the work they did with their hands, for the years they gave to other people, for the simplicity of how they lived. Quiet lives are not small lives. The things built without an audience are often the most solid things of all. And to anyone who has stood at a table and watched someone set aside something precious of yours without opening it, your time will come. Wait for the right moment. You will know it when it arrives. Don't let anyone rush you toward it, and don't let anyone tell you it isn't worth it. It is worth it. It always was.